Traders, we've got a shortened week coming up with an early close on Thursday, 1 p.m., I believe, and then Friday the market's closed. And historically, during this period of time, what I've seen in the past is certainly several outlier moves with small caps, and really in sort of the latter part of the week, a little bit of failed follow through with large caps as volume dies down, and people go on holiday a little bit early. So just something to keep in mind of as we approach really the shortened holiday week. But with that in mind, here are some of my top ideas for the upcoming week. Also outlining some ideal entry and exit scenarios. It's a fairly lengthy list this week with quite a few names on watch, so I'll keep it a little bit briefer than usual for each. First off, starting with Ava, and looking for potential exhaustion or failed follow through. So the chart here really, speaks for itself. We've had an exceptional move higher this year, up almost 700% year to date. I think 670% year to date as of Friday's close. And finally, now with RSI creeping into the low 80s, the end of last week, it's definitely kind of nearing a potential short opportunity for pullback, profit taking. And as always with such an opportunity, I'm not really ever looking to be early and try pick a top. Rather, I'd like to see some failed follow through to the upside, and especially as we start to go a little bit vertical now on a higher time frame, with volume and range beginning to finally expand as we go vertical from the sort of end of last week. So what I mean by all of that is I'd like to see a gap higher fail to hold. For example, we gap higher on Monday. 37, 38, 39, we fail to hold, we pull back and we open up red for a potential first trade day setup. Alternatively, I'd want to see a gap up with exhaustion higher in the morning in the pre-market or off the open, and then looking for failed follow through thereafter, an engulfing move lower, and targeting a lower high short entry or consolidation breakdown. Lastly, another potential scenario is we get some extreme follow through intraday. We potentially get a parabolic or exhaustion move intraday, and then I'd only look to be entering short once we get that volume exchange and clear failure. So I really wouldn't be looking to be short here for longer than, I would say, 2 days. Potentially targeting a retracement towards the low 30s, towards that rising 5-day. But of course, it all depends on the setup and whether or not it even materializes during the shortened week. All right, next up we have Bitcoin. So look at the ETF IBIT for a potential breakout. Very straightforward technical setup. You can see here with a really nice bull flag forming 10-day, 20-day last week, acted as support over the last 3 days. So I'd really just be keeping a very close eye here to see if we can push above last week's high, start to base above 62, breaking this bull flag, breaking this downtrend of the bull flag, and resistance. And thereafter, really, I'd be looking for a momentum entry against the low of day. And should the range open up, and we experience a little bit of follow through there, I certainly would be open to a higher time frame swing trade, trailing against the previous day's low for some follow through over multiple days. Consolidation breakout in Nebius is next, and this is very similar to the plan I had last week. Very similar to the plan from last week. Essentially, it continues to base extremely well, well within reach of its highs. That stuff on Wednesday, failed move lower, potentially comes a fast move higher. Nice failed move lower with a strong reclaim. It only gets me more bullish for potential follow through going forward, but that's a big if, and if we can reclaim and push above 54. So very similar to last week, if we do push above 54, we see a little bit of relative strength among some of its peers. Against some of its peers, that's when I'd look for momentum long intraday for a potential push above 55. And then similar to NBIS, in terms of what we've seen play out last week, is TOST with a nice failed move as well on Wednesday, a sharp reclaim after finding some support, and now broken back above its short and mid-term moving averages. So very similar to NBIS as well. If this clears the key level 45, I'd be looking for a nice momentum entry against the low of day, and I'd be looking for a swing trade there as well. Amazon certainly worth a mention after Friday's push over resistance. Now that the entry was 220 on Friday for a swing trade. However, if the stock pulls back to the low 220s on Monday, and we see previous resistance become support. We see a higher low confirmed versus Friday's action. That could also provide another additional entry for continuation to the upside. And it's worth mentioning as well XLY, where Amazon, I think, is 22-23% weighting of that sector ETF. Consumer discretionary had a lovely breakout as well. So another potential vehicle for that idea. And then lastly, just a couple low floats and small caps worth mentioning. First up is LCFY. Let's put on VWAP rather. Small float, decent staying power on Friday. And so I'm just going to have some alerts set in case this pushes back towards potential supply near 10 and in the 11s, potential failure spots and supply from Friday, the most immediate spots. Above what will become the 2-day VWAP. And if we get any failed follow through, any stuff into those key areas and engulfing move to the downside thereafter, would look for reactive shorts. Alternatively, however, Tuesday, Wednesday, as we get to midweek, near the end of the week, it will also be on watch for a potential liquidity trap. If we are able to push over 11, grind a little bit higher on decreasing volume, especially wildly less volume than what was traded on Friday for a potential liquidity crisis. If we push above 11 and 12 and start to consolidate, it could be on watch, and I'd be open for a potential long intraday. And then finally, another small cap, CYN, multiple offerings last week. Decent staying power relative to where those offerings were priced. Looking at CYN on watch, potential day 3 short if we are able to push back into the low sort of 20s into potential overhead and resistance and failure where we got some momentum to the downside on Friday. If we push back into low 220s and stuff, I'd be open to a reactive short, only intraday, not a swing trade. And similarly to LCFY, if we do reclaim its multi-day VWAP, 3-day VWAP, 4-day VWAP as the week approaches, it might be on watch as well, barring any additional offerings for potential intraday squeeze out and liquidity crisis. But nothing that I'm too bearish nor bullish on. Same goes with LCFY, given volume, given float, and given a shortened week. Certainly don't want to be too biased for this upcoming week. So that's everything that's on watch for the upcoming week. And of course, another reminder, shortened week, Thursday, early close, Friday, markets are closed. So adjust your plans, your expectations, etc. Drop in the comments below what your top watches are for the upcoming week. Let me know your plans, your thoughts, and I'm wishing you all the best for the week, and I'll see you next week.